In this video, we are going to learn about the hypothesis testing and the various steps that are involved in this hypothesis testing. So let's get started. Now, this video is all about hypothesis test, the steps in hypothesis, and the statistical test interpretation. So let's get started, and let's start by understanding what exactly is this hypothesis test. Now, when I say hypothesis, hypothesis is nothing but a claim. It's a claim which is also known as a current belief. Okay, here the overall objective of the hypothesis is to either reject or retain my null hypothesis, which is my current belief. And we do it with the help of the data. Normally, this hypothesis consists of two complementary statements. One is a null hypothesis and the another statement is called as alternate hypothesis. To give you an example, the examples for null hypothesis can be something like children who drinks Boost, which is a health drink produced by the company called Nestle, are likely to grow taller and stronger. Now this is my current belief. And another example for null hypothesis can be something like women are more addicted to Instagram than men. Vegetarians miss few flights. And smokers make more sales than non-smokers. So these are all the examples of null hypothesis which just says what is the current belief. Now remember, this current belief may not exactly be right all the time. But here, the overall goal of this hypothesis testing is we have to either accept these null hypothesis or we have to either reject this null hypothesis with the help of the data. That is the overall idea behind this hypothesis testing. From the machine learning perspective, maybe I'm going to say that I've got 4 features in a given data set, and I'm going to say that this out of these 4 features, one feature over here is having a greater importance in affecting my target column. Now, in such scenarios, in order to decide whether this claim is correct or not, what we will do, we are going to perform the relevant hypothesis testing to check whether the claim that we are making that is this one feature is more important for target, so whether this claim is correct or not. And that is the overall idea behind this hypothesis testing. Now let's understand the various steps that are involved in this hypothesis test. The first step is defining the null and alternate hypothesis. So here we are going to decide, okay, what is our current belief and what will be its complementary statement. And we will say the current belief as null hypothesis, and the complementary statement of the null hypothesis we are going to call it as a alternate hypothesis. Now, once we define the null and alternate hypothesis, we are going to identify the test statistic. So using this test statistic, we are going to decide whether the null hypothesis will be followed or whether it will follow the alternate hypothesis. Now, once we identify this test statistic, we also have to decide the criteria for rejection and retention of this null hypothesis for this selected test statistic. And post that, we are going to actually calculate the value of P, which is the probability value. And this is a conditional probability observing the test statistic when my null hypothesis is true. Now, depending on the value of P, we are going to either retain the null hypothesis or we are going to reject the null hypothesis. So this is the high level steps that we'll be following whenever we are performing this hypothesis testing. Now, when we talk about this hypothesis test, there are two important terms that I have mentioned right now, that is p-value and a critical value. Now, when I say this p-value actually represents a number. Yes, it actually represents the number between 0 and 1, and it is interpreted as a percentage score between 0 and 100. In a general scenario, the ideal value that we would consider is 5%. Sometimes we also consider it as 1% depending on the problem that we are working. But in a general scenario, 5% is the general p-value that we would consider. And coming to the critical value, so critical values are nothing but the values on the scale of the test statistic beyond which we are going to reject the null hypothesis. So this is what a critical value is. So the way that we are going to interpret whenever we are performing this hypothesis testing is, if the value of p is greater than alpha, then it actually means that we fail to reject the null hypothesis, that is, it is not a significant result. And if the value of p is less than or equal to alpha, then we are going to reject the null hypothesis. So alpha, as I mentioned, we'll generally keep it as 0.05. Okay. And with the help of critical value, the way that we are going to use this critical value during the hypothesis testing is, we are going to check the test statistic. If the test statistic is less than the critical value, then we fail to reject the null hypothesis. If the test statistic is greater than or equal to critical value, then we are going to reject the null hypothesis. So this is how we are going to interpret the statistical test. Okay, we calculate both p-value and critical value based on the same. So we are going to either reject the null hypothesis or we are going to retain the null hypothesis. So as part of your learning journey in this video, you have learned about what exactly is this hypothesis testing and how do we interpret the statistical test on the basis of p and the critical value.
All right, we hope you enjoyed the lecture on Introduction to Hypothesis Testing. So, as most of the learners these days are struggling to learn the generative AI, so we have created a structured learning path at Manifold AI Learning. So, do check out our free course link that we have mentioned in the description so that you can get started with your learning journey with generative AI. So, I'll see you next time.